Welcome back, classic camera lovers, and allow me to take you back to 1999, a vintage year for Nikon, seeing not just the launch of its first in-house DSLR, the D1, but also of the COOLPIX 950, a hugely popular model in the history of digital photography. In this video, I'll reveal what made it so special and see how it stands up over 2 decades later. The COOLPIX 950 may have been the second of 4 models in the 900 series, but arguably it was the most impressive on launch and the one that really defined and set out Nikon's vision of a high-end all-in-one digital camera. It came out in early 1999 and cost around $850 to $1,000. 1 year earlier, the original silver-coloured COOLPIX 900 introduced the split body concept with the lens, sensor, viewfinder and flash in the left half, leaving the screen, controls, batteries and grip in the right. In use, you'd hold the right half while twisting the imaging portion through just over 270 degrees, and that allowed you to shoot comfortably at high or low angles, or even face backwards for selfies. It looks pretty unique today, but it was actually a fairly common idea in the late 90s, with Minolta, Ricoh, Casio, JVC and Sony also selling split-bodied cameras. In fact, Agfa was one of the first to do so in 1997 with the ePhoto 1280. For the COOLPIX 950, Nikon took the design concept of 900 but tweaked it to look and feel far more professional, not to mention more consistent with their existing film camera heritage. The new magnesium body swapped angular corners out for comfortable curves and switched the finish from silver to black with a stylish red oval on the inside grip. They're subtle adjustments but add up to a camera that looks and feels less like an electronic toy and much more like a serious camera for professional use. Impressively, it feels as good today as it did when I first reviewed it 23 years ago. The twisting mechanism in particular remains an ergonomic triumph, smoothly turning with just the right amount of friction even 2 decades later, with very satisfying tactile notches at the 390-degree intervals. It's the kind of physical interactivity and feedback that I actually miss on modern cameras, and no flipping shutter fold-out screen doesn't come close. The use of 4 AA batteries also gives the grip section some reassuring heft in your hands, neatly counterbalancing the lens section, and crucially ensuring that you're still able to easily power it up today. I used a set of just standard modern Eneloops which worked fine. Behind a new rubber flap alongside the battery compartment is a Type 1 compact flash card slot, sadly too thin to accommodate the 1GB IBM microdrive. Back in the day, this meant solely relying on solid-state cards with much smaller capacities, but today I can live my 1GB COOLPIX fantasy by using my trusty SanDisk Ultra 2 card, which seems to work in everything. Like its predecessor, the tripod thread isn't in line with the lens axis and continues to block both the card and battery compartments when mounted. Nikon moved the card slot to the grip side of the later COOLPIX 990. In terms of ports, there's a composite video output for TV slideshows, a DC input for an optional AC power adapter, a PC sync port for external flashes under the lens section, and a serial port on the side, although sadly not USB, even though some cameras were beginning to adopt it around that time. Nikon supplied the 950 with a pair of serial cables for Macs or PCs, but running at a glacial speed even in 1999 meant you'd be better off using a separate compact flash card reader both then and today. The clicky shutter release button and collar control again give the impression of a proper camera rather than some piece of consumer electronics, and they also allow you to quickly switch the COOLPIX 950 on into automatic, semi-automatic and playback modes. Meanwhile, a front finger dial can be used to adjust the exposure or various settings while you're also pushing one of the buttons. For example, set the 950 to MREC mode and you can choose between program, aperture and shutter priority by pushing the mode button while turning the dial. Once in the desired mode, the dial can choose one of 3 aperture values or shutter speeds between 500th of a second and 8 seconds. Meanwhile, the 2 buttons alongside the shutter button let you directly click between flash and focusing modes. But if you hold either of them and turn the dial at the same time, you can adjust the ISO sensitivity or a selection of preset manual focusing distances. The MREC mode also unlocks more options in the main menu system, including white balance presets and metering modes, pretty unusual for the day, and including Nikon's excellent matrix metering system. The navigation all works well, although for me could have been even better if they'd used the more substantial finger dial of the D1 DSLR launched in the same year. Interestingly, Nikon did switch to a more tactile wheel for the subsequent 990 and 995 models, but swapped its position to become a thumb dial instead. At a time when many digital cameras employed rebranded lenses, Nikon designed their own 3x optical zoom for the 950 with an equivalent range of 38 to 115mm and a maximum aperture of f2.6 to 4. Like its predecessor, the 950 employed full-time continuous autofocus, resulting in a faint chattering sound as it constantly refocused wherever you pointed it. Nikon proudly stated it featured 4,746 AF increments, although you could alternatively choose one of 10 preset manual focusing distances. What really made the 950's lens stand out though was an impressively close minimum focusing distance of just 2 centimeters, although that was achieved roughly midway through its zoom range. Here I was able to fill the frame with subjects measuring just over 20mm in width, such as a UK pound coin. It also meant you could use the COOLPIX 950 to scan slide film using the optional ES-E28 adapter. Annoyingly though, the macro mode was on the same menu as the self-timer, and that prevented you from using both at the same time. I also appreciated the smooth zooming mechanism of the lens versus many rival models around that time which lurched back and forth in coarse increments, making it really hard to nail the exact composition you wanted, although this in turn did make the zooming process of the 950 quite slow. If you were after tighter or wider coverage, Nikon offered a selection of optional lens adapters. The TC-E2 and E3-ED doubled and tripled the effective reach. The WC-E24 and E63 widened it by 2/3, while the FC-E8 fisheye converter provided a taste of the exotic with a 183-degree field of view. Behind the lens was a 1/2-inch type 2.1 megapixel CCD sensor, generating images with a maximum resolution of 1600 by 1200 pixels, although no video on this model. If 2.1 megapixels were too much for you, there's 2 low resolutions and the choice of 3 JPEG compression levels. Best quality JPEGs measured around 700 kilobytes each, but if you really wanted to push the boat out, you could alternatively opt for an uncompressed TIFF option at the full resolution, although at around 8 megabytes per file, you could fill a typical card of the day with just 1 or 2 pictures. Sensitivity ran between 80 and 400 ISO, cryptically labelled DEF 100 +1 and +2, although when set to auto the camera would stick to 80 ISO for the least noise, albeit running the risk of camera shake in dimmer conditions. There were also burst options at 1.5 frames per second using the full resolution, or at 2 frames per second at the reduced VGA resolution. For composition, there's a basic optical viewfinder or a 2-inch screen with 130,000 dots, and you can boost the brightness for easier daytime viewing, albeit burning through your batteries that bit quicker. During playback, you can view shooting information, as well as thumbnails or mildly magnified views, checking the image one section at a time. Right, now it's time for my customary slideshow around Brighton, all taken with the COOLPIX 950 23 years after it was first launched. See you in a minute. The COOLPIX 950 arrived at a pivotal moment in digital camera history as they made the transition from low-resolution electronic toys to serious photographic tools. Sure, 2 megapixels doesn't sound like a great deal, but their image quality and crucially the handling and the degree of photographic control was now sufficient to persuade many people to make the switch from film, at least for some jobs. Whenever I mention the COOLPIX 950 or either of its successors online, I hear from countless former owners who use them for jobs on various local papers, at schools, or in small businesses. They were often the first exposure that many people had to digital photography, and that memory has stayed with them. It's certainly revealing that while Nikon also sold a simpler and more affordable version of the 950 called the COOLPIX 700, which coincidentally actually won a PCW magazine group test, no one ever seems to mention that one. The 950, 990 and 995 were the truly revered models that everyone wanted, and that swiveling mechanism was a key part of the appeal. Speaking of which, the 990 arrived 1 year later in the year 2000, sporting 3 megapixels and the sensible relocation of the card slot, following by the 995 1 year after that, which employed a rechargeable battery pack, a pop-up flash, and extended the zoom range from 3 to 4 times, albeit now with a thicker lens section that, for me, began to lose some of the charm of the earlier models. But tell me what you think. Which was your favourite of the early COOLPIX models? For me, personally speaking, it's between the 950 and the 990, but be in no doubt that every serious vintage camera fan will need at least one classic COOLPIX in their collection. So what's it going to be? And that's it for another serving of nostalgia. Please do let me know about your first digital camera experiences, and if you have time, I'd love for you to check out some of my other videos here. And if you really enjoy what I do, please do consider subscribing, as it really helps a smaller channel to grow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.